My son used to say I was his safe place. I never told him that's where monsters hide best. That's how it begins. With something small. A word, a smile, a promise. You build a home out of soft things. And somewhere inside it, something sharp waits. My name is Maya Bryson. I live in a quiet town in Ohio, where the cornfields meet the old gray river. The houses here lean a little, like they're tired of keeping secrets. People wave from their porches. They know my face, but not my story. I'm the woman who brings soup when you're sick. The one who hums at the store. The one nobody ever looks at twice. That used to make me feel safe. Now it makes me feel invisible. I had one son. His name was Daniel Bryson. He was born on a cold Sunday morning. And for a long time, I thought he was light itself. He had this laugh that made the neighbors forgive anything. Even the broken windows. Even the lies. When he was little, Daniel liked to take things apart. Clocks, radios, my sewing machine. He said he wanted to see what made them tick. I should have known then. He'd grow up wanting to see what made people tick too. He could read anyone, smile the right smile, say the right words, and they'd hand him what he wanted. His father died when Daniel was 10. A car crash. Black ice and cheap whiskey. After that, it was just us. I told myself I'd keep Daniel safe, no matter what it cost. And for years, I did. I cleaned houses by day, took night shifts at the care home, bought his shoes from thrift stores, so he could have new books instead. He grew up polite, smart, beautiful. Too beautiful, maybe. People mistook his charm for goodness. I wanted to believe it was the same thing. But goodness is quieter. It doesn't need applause. When he left for college, he hugged me once and said, "Don't worry, Ma, I'll make you proud." And for a while, I thought he did. He sent pictures, him in clean shirts, standing beside new cars that weren't his. Always smiling, always shining. He called once a week at first, then once a month, then not at all. The silence grew like mold between us. Until one night, years later, the phone rang again. It was him. His voice was lower now, smoother, practiced. He said, "Ma, I need your help, but you can't ask why." I didn't ask. That's the thing about mothers. We answer first and think later. He came home the next day, driving a car that smelled like new leather and fear. He looked tired but polished, like a man who'd been living too fast. He kissed my cheek and said I looked good. Then he walked straight to the kitchen, opened the cabinet, and pulled out the whiskey bottle that wasn't his. He poured a glass and stared out the window. "Who is she?" I asked, because I knew it was always a she with him. He smiled without looking at me. Just someone who trusted me too much. The way he said it made my stomach twist. He told me her name was Claire Mason. A widow, a kind one. The sort of woman who baked pies for strangers. She had money left by her late husband. Daniel said they were working together, that she'd invested in something. But his hands shook when he said it. He said Claire was threatening to go to the police, that she thought he'd stolen from her. I wanted to believe it was a misunderstanding, but I saw the fear in his eyes. Not fear of jail, fear of losing control. That night, while he slept in his old room, I went through his coat. Inside the pocket, I found a ring, a small gold band with tiny diamonds around it. It wasn't for me, and it wasn't his to keep. I remember sitting there, ring in my hand, and thinking, what did I raise? The next morning, he asked if I could drive with him to the lake house. He said he needed to fix something and didn't want to be alone. The lake was half frozen, still and gray, the kind of cold that crawls into your lungs and stays. When we got there, he told me to wait in the car, but I didn't. I followed. Through the window, I saw Claire. She was standing by the kitchen counter, hair loose, face red from crying. Daniel held her hands. He said something I couldn't hear. Then she pushed him. He caught her shoulders, softly at first, then harder. And for a long second, neither of them moved. I wanted to scream, but the sound froze in my throat. I stepped back. The snow crunched. Daniel looked toward the window, and our eyes met. Just once. Just enough. When he came out later, his face was white. He said, "She slipped. It was an accident." I didn't ask what that meant. He put his hands on my shoulders and whispered, "Please, Ma, don't look inside." So I didn't. I turned the car key, and we drove home in silence. That was the longest drive of my life. That night, I washed my hands over and over. Though they weren't dirty, I could smell lake water on my skin. I could hear her voice in the wind, even though I'd never heard it alive. Daniel slept like a child. I sat in the dark and listened to his breathing. And I realized something I wish I never knew. Love can turn into a cave if you hold it too tight. He left before sunrise. No note, no goodbye. Just gone. And for months, I pretended life went on. I went to work. I smiled at the neighbors. I made casseroles I couldn't eat. But inside, I was rotting. Every time the phone rang, I thought it would be the police. Every time it wasn't. I felt both relief and disappointment. One afternoon, while folding laundry, I found that gold ring again. He must have dropped it between the couch cushions. It caught the light like an open eye. I held it tight. And that's when something broke in me. Not anger. Clarity. The kind that burns quiet. He had taken someone's life, and I had helped him hide it. That made me the same as him. Maybe worse. That night, I drove back to the lake alone. The water had thawed. There were no footprints left. Just silence. I stood there, listening. And in that stillness, I heard my own heartbeat say, "He will do it again." And I knew then what my revenge would be. Not against Claire, not even against Daniel, but against the part of me that thought love could erase sin. The tape crackles here. You can almost hear her exhale before she speaks again. If you ever meet a man who smiles too easily, look past his teeth. There's always something hiding behind them. She pauses, then whispers almost kindly, "The lake took one life that winter. It's waiting for another." The police never came. Weeks passed, and the town stayed quiet. Winter turned to spring, and the snow melted. But the lake still looked gray, like it knew something the rest of us didn't. I told myself maybe Claire had moved away. Maybe she'd left a note no one saw. That's what Daniel said when he called one night. His voice smooth again, calm, like nothing bad had ever happened. "Ma," he said, "you worry too much, she's fine." And I wanted to believe him, So I said I did. But that word fine kept echoing in my head. It sounded like a lid closing. He started visiting more often after that. Always in a rush, always on the phone. He'd talk about investors, houses, deals. Words that felt too big for the small kitchen we sat in. He said he was building something that would change our lives. He said he was finally good. But I knew better. You can polish a lie until it shines like the truth. It's still a lie. He brought me gifts now. Perfume I'd never wear. A silk scarf still smelling of someone else. Once, he brought me a framed photo of him and Claire. It was taken before she disappeared. They stood by the lake, smiling. Her head was tilted toward him, his arm around her waist. If you didn't know better, you'd think it was love. I stared at the picture and asked, "Why are you giving this to me?" He shrugged. "Because you always said memories matter." When he left that night, I put the photo face down on the shelf. The glass cracked sometime after midnight. I didn't fix it. It was months later when I found her voice. Not her real voice, her words. Letters. 3 of them, tucked inside a folder Daniel left behind. Each was written in careful, nervous handwriting. "Daniel, I don't care about the money. I just want to know you meant it. Please stop calling when you're drunk. I'm scared. If you love me, prove it. Tell your mother about us." The last one was dated 3 days before she died. I sat there on the floor, reading them over and over. The words smelled faintly of perfume and fear. And that's when the story finally made sense. He hadn't just stolen her money. He'd stolen her peace, her safety, her name. And when she threatened to tell, he'd chosen silence over truth. That silence had weight. It pressed on my chest every night. One warm evening, Daniel came again. He looked different, tired, thinner. He said business was hard. People were turning on him. And he needed a reset. He smiled and said, "You always fix things, Ma." I made coffee, but he didn't drink it. He just stared at the window like he expected someone to appear. Then he said, "Do you think people can forgive anything?" I asked, "Why? What did you do now?" He laughed, but his eyes didn't move. "Nothing, just wondering." The silence between us grew thick. I could hear the clock ticking. Each sound felt like a heartbeat that wasn't mine. When he left, I saw he dropped something by the door. A small silver bracelet with the name C. Mason engraved inside. I didn't pick it up. I just stared at it until it stopped shining. After finding those letters, I started piecing together what Daniel had done. He'd met Claire through his work. She was lonely and kind. He told her she reminded him of me. He said he never knew love could feel safe again. She believed him. He asked her to invest in a real estate fund. Told her it was for a new senior living center. She signed papers she didn't read. He transferred her savings into his own account. But guilt is a strange thing. It makes smart people do dumb acts of hope. Claire started asking questions. She wanted to meet the partners, see the property. Daniel promised he'd show her one day. That one day became the night at the lake. I dreamed of her sometimes. Not her face, but the sound of her crying. It echoed like wind through the trees. I'd wake up sweating, thinking I smelled lake water. I started writing, too. Notes I'd never send. To Daniel, to Claire, to God. I told them all the same thing. I didn't mean to let this happen. But words can't wash blood off your hands. Only truth can. And I was too afraid to tell it. One afternoon, I was at the grocery store when a woman stopped me near the frozen aisle. She asked if I knew Claire Mason. I lied and said no. The woman said, I used to see her with a younger man. Handsome, blonde, always dressed nice. She smiled sadly. I think she loved him. My hands shook so hard I dropped the bag of peas. The woman helped me pick them up. Are you okay, honey? She asked. I nodded. Then I went home and cried until the sun came up. Because now I knew the world was starting to notice. A week later, a plain envelope came to my mailbox. No return address. Inside was a single photograph. Claire and Daniel again. This time by the lake at night. The flash had caught her eyes mid-blink. Behind them, something dark in the water looked like a shape. Like a shadow that wasn't supposed to be there. I burned the photo. But the smell stuck in my clothes. Ash and perfume. That night, I made a decision. If Daniel wouldn't face what he'd done, then I would make him see it. Slowly. The way guilt eats the heart one bite at a time. I started small. A text from an unknown number. Do you still think she forgave you? He called me right after. Ma, did you send that? I said no. He said it must be a prank. But his voice trembled. Then I left one of Claire's letters, folded inside his jacket pocket. When he wasn't looking, he found it a day later. He called again, angry this time. Who's messing with me? I said I didn't know. He said he kept hearing her name everywhere. Every act was small. A whisper in his ear. A photo mailed to his work. A song on the radio that used to be hers. Nothing that could be traced, but enough to keep him awake at night. I told myself it was justice. But late at night, it felt like I was building a mirror and forcing him to look at himself. And maybe at me, too. When he came home again, he looked sick, pale. He said someone was following him. He said he saw her car in the street, the same blue sedan. But Claire's car was gone months ago. I asked if he'd been drinking. He said no. Then he whispered, She's not dead. I know she's not. That's when I realized. The plan was working. But it also scared me. How calm I felt watching him fall apart. He stayed for dinner that night. Barely touched his food. When he went to bed, I walked into his room and stared at him. He looked so young again. Like the boy who used to build paper boats and send them down the creek. And I thought, if only he'd learned how to let them sink. That night I couldn't sleep. I heard footsteps in the hall. Slow, dragging ones. I got up. But there was no one there. Just the sound of wind at the window. When I turned, I saw the gold ring on the counter. The one I'd hidden. It was standing upright. Like someone had placed it there on purpose. I picked it up. And for the first time, I said her name out loud. Claire. And somewhere inside, I felt something shift. Not guilt. Not fear. Something colder. Because I finally understood what I was going to do. I would let the past walk again. And I would let Daniel meet it. Face to face. 2 nights later, I mailed one last letter. It had no name. No address. Just one line inside. Meet me at the lake, midnight. I didn't sign it. I didn't have to. He would know who it was meant for. When I dropped the letter into the mailbox, the air felt sharp and still, like the whole town was holding its breath. As I walked home, the church bell rang in the distance, 12 slow chimes, and with each one, I whispered her name again. Claire, Claire, Claire. By the last bell, the world was quiet, and I knew somewhere. Daniel had opened the envelope, and he was on his way to the lake. Love, she whispers on the tape, isn't what you do for someone. It's what you're willing to live with after. The lake kept its secret once. It won't do it again. I used to tell Daniel that lies rot when you hide them. I didn't know they could bloom instead. Morning light touched the kitchen like nothing had happened. The paper on the table was still blank. The coffee pot was cold, but my hands would not stop shaking. Daniel came in without knocking. He looked like a ghost that had borrowed his own body. He said, "Ma, I need you to listen, please." And I did, because mothers always do. He said Claire had fallen. He said the police might not understand. He said he just needed a little help cleaning up. I remember thinking how calm his voice sounded, like he was explaining a spilled drink. And then I remember nodding. That was my first sin that day. The road to the lake was empty. Mist rolled over the water like breath. He told me not to look at anything, just to hold the flashlight. I held it tight until my knuckles turned white. Inside the house, the air was sweet. Too sweet, like perfume and wine mixed together. A chair was tipped over. A cup was broken. That was all I saw before he said, "Stay outside." But I didn't. I looked once. Just once. Enough to know she wasn't moving. When he came out, he carried a blanket. He said, "It's done." I asked, "What's done?" He didn't answer. He just told me to drive. He sat beside me the whole way home. Hands folded, eyes forward. Not one tear. Not one word. And I thought, if guilt had a face, it would look quiet like that. At home, he washed his hands. I washed mine. The sink ran red from rust in the pipes. But it looked wrong, like the water knew more than it should. That night, he burned his clothes in the backyard barrel. The smoke smelled like metal and cheap cologne. Neighbors never asked. Around here, people don't ask. The next morning, he said, "She left town." Just like that. A clean line to erase a life. I helped him build the story. Claire had family in Michigan. She needed space. She'd call soon. We said it enough times that the lie began to sound gentle, like a lullaby for the truth. But every small sound in that house became her voice to me. The faucet drip, the floor creak, the wind against the glass. Each whisper asked the same question. Why did you help him? And I never had an answer. A month later, a sheriff came by asking about Daniel. He said Claire's sister had reported her missing. I made tea, smiled, and said the same lie we practiced. She went to Michigan. The sheriff nodded, wrote something down, and left a card on the counter. After the door closed, Daniel laughed softly. "See, we're fine." I wanted to believe him, but fine isn't a word that lasts. Weeks later, he said, "We need to move her car." He didn't say why. We drove again, under rain that looked silver in the headlights. When we reached the lake, fog hung so low it touched the ground. He parked near the old boathouse. I stayed in the car. He disappeared into the dark. Minutes stretched. Then I saw headlights roll slowly into the water. He came back soaked and shaking. He said, "No one will find anything now." And I think that was the first time I saw fear in him. Not of being caught, but of being seen by God. Back home, he showered. Steam filled the hallway. Through the noise, I heard him whisper, "She made me do it." Over and over. She made me do it. When he came out, I looked at him. He looked back. And for the first time, I realized we shared the same eyes. Gray, flat, and tired. I wanted to hold him. Instead, I turned away. Because if I touched him, I might start to believe he was still my boy. He left town again, and I thought maybe the story would end there. But it didn't, because guilt has a smell, and it seeps into walls. One evening, I lit the stove for supper, and saw smoke rising from the corner of the counter. The folder, the one with Claire's letters, was burning. He must have left it there on purpose, to finish the job. I put out the flame, but one page was gone. The words that remained were black at the edges. "You said I could trust you." I pinned that line to the fridge. I made myself read it every morning. It was the only truth left in that house. Daniel began calling again. His voice sounded smaller each time. He said someone was asking questions. He said people were whispering his name. He said he couldn't sleep. I told him to tell the truth. He hung up. That was our last call for a long while. At night, I'd sit on the porch, listening to the frogs by the creek. The sound reminded me of that lake. Everything did. The moonlight, the smell of rain, the way my heart jumped when a car slowed near the house. And in that long quiet, I started planning something. Not to hurt him. Not yet. But to make him look at what he'd done. Until he couldn't breathe. She came one afternoon in summer. Pretty woman, nervous hands. She said she was just trying to find answers. She showed me a photo. Claire at a picnic, smiling. "Have you seen her?" she asked. I opened my mouth, but no sound came out. Then I said, "She was kind." That was all. And maybe that was the only honest thing I'd said in months. When she left, she gave me a church flyer. There was a verse on the back about mercy. I tore it in half. One night, I dreamed I was back at the lake. Daniel was a child again, standing on the dock, calling for me. But when I tried to walk to him, the boards turned to glass, and I could see her face beneath it. Eyes open, mouth moving without sound. I woke before dawn, heart pounding, and that's when I knew. I couldn't keep the lie alive anymore. It was feeding on both of us. If I wanted peace, I'd have to end it myself. Not with police. Not with shouting. With silence sharp enough to cut. The next time Daniel came home, he found the letter on his pillow. It wasn't from Claire. Not really. It was from me. But written in her voice. "I see you every night. The water doesn't forget." He called me screaming. "Why are you doing this?" I said, "Doing what?" He said, "You know." Then the line went dead. I looked out the window. The moon sat low and full. And for a second, I saw the reflection of two faces. Mine and his. And they looked the same. A mother is supposed to save her child. Margaret says softly on the tape. But sometimes, Saving means letting the truth finish what it started. The lake took one life. It's waiting for another. And this time, I won't look away. Daniel came home 3 weeks later. He looked thinner, hair longer, eyes wild like a man who had walked through fire and forgot how to speak. He didn't knock. He just opened the door and stood there, dripping rain on the floor. He said, "I know it was you." I said nothing. He stepped closer. "I know you wrote that letter." The room was small enough to hold only one of us, and the lie between us. I said, "You needed to remember." He said, "You're sick." I said, "So are you." That was the last time he ever raised his voice to me. He threw the letter on the table. It slid across and stopped near the old salt shaker. His hands shook. He whispered, "You want me to suffer?" I looked at him and told the truth. "Yes, I do." He stared like he didn't recognize me. Maybe he didn't. Maybe I didn't either. Then he said something that tore the air. She was pregnant. I felt my knees weaken. My hands went cold. I thought of the lake, the water, the silence, and all I could say was, "Then you took 2 lives." That's when he snapped. He pushed the chair. He said, "You don't understand what she did to me." I said, "No, Daniel, I understand what you did to yourself." The thunder outside cracked hard against the roof. Lightning flashed, white and mean. And for the first time, I saw the look of a man ready to end something. He told me to get in the car. He said we were fixing this tonight. I didn't ask where. I knew. The lake had been waiting. The rain followed us the whole way. It hit the windshield so hard it sounded like whispers. He kept gripping the wheel until his knuckles went white. He said, "You're gonna help me one last time, Ma." I said, "I already did." The road turned dark and narrow. When we reached the water, fog wrapped around the car like smoke. He stopped at the edge. The engine hummed low. I could smell gasoline and rain. He said, "You always cleaned up after me." I said, "Not this time." He smiled, small and broken. "I know." He got out first. The rain made his shirt stick to his back. He walked toward the dock. I followed, slow. Every step felt like walking through old memories. Birthday candles, baseball games, the sound of him laughing before he learned to lie. He turned and said, "You ever wonder what it feels like to stop pretending?" I said, "Every day." He looked at the water, then at me. "I hear her sometimes," he said. "In the dark when it rains." He smiled again, the kind of smile that makes your heart stop before your breath does. Then he pulled the chain from his neck. Claire's ring hung from it. He held it out. "This belongs down there," he said. He dropped it into the lake. The splash was small, but the sound went on forever. Then he stepped forward. 1 step, 2, 3, until the water was at his waist. I shouted, "Daniel." He didn't turn. He said, "You always said the truth floats." Then he took 1 more step and disappeared beneath the surface. I ran to the edge, but the water was black and still. No bubbles, no sound, only the rain. I waited. 5 minutes. 10. My hands were shaking too hard to call for help. The storm swallowed every sound except my breathing. When the lightning flashed again, I saw nothing but ripples. The truth had finally floated. And it was gone. I drove home before sunrise. The house smelled like wet wood and regret. His boots were still by the door. His coat hung on the rack. I didn't move them. I sat at the table and wrote one line on that same blank page. My son found peace where I lost mine. Then I folded the paper and placed it under his photograph. I lit a candle. I watched it burn low, wax dripping like time. I told myself he'd finally stopped hearing her voice. But some nights, when the wind hits the glass just right, I swear I still hear him whisper my name. They'll call it a tragedy. But it was a debt paid in full.